We've all seen that person. Or, if we're being totally honest with ourselves, we've been that person. Everything is actually going, okay, for once. The job isn't a nightmare, the relationship is solid, and your bank account isn't screaming at you. And then, from some weird, dark corner of your brain, something starts pulling. An urge you can't quite name. You open a door you know you shouldn't. You send a text that didn't need to be sent. You make a choice that, from the outside, looks completely, bafflingly irrational. Because from the outside, you had everything you needed. And then, just like that, you didn't. The strange part isn't even what was lost. The strange part is that you already had more than enough. It's that the one thing you reached for, the one extra thing, was the exact thing that cost you the whole world. There's a story for this. It's one of the oldest ones we've got, and it records this exact glitch in the human software. It's not just a myth or a Sunday school lesson to keep kids online. It's actually a clinical, pretty account of what happens to our heads when we hit a boundary inside of abundance. It's about what happens when we find the one no in a world full of yes. It's the story of Genesis, the garden. Two people who had the world, and then blew it. And look, if you've ever watched yourself blow up something good, you're going to recognize every single frame of this. My name is John, and if you are joining me here for the first time, welcome. I believe the intersection of spirituality and psychology is essential for a true understanding of the human experience. By integrating these two perspectives, we can better support and understand one another. Back to our story. Close your eyes for a second. Actually, don't do that. Stay with me. Just imagine a place that hands you everything before you even think to ask for it. The air is the perfect temperature. The ground is soft. There's food that isn't just food. It's flavors you didn't even know your brain could process until your teeth broke the skin. There's companionship so complete that you've literally never felt that hollow, unknown ache. This isn't just not being poor. This is abundance in its most heavy, saturating form. And then, there's the tree. It's not hidden in the back. It's right there, in the middle of everything. And the rule is almost suspiciously simple. Don't eat from that one. Not because it's ugly. Not because it's poison. In fact, and this is the part most sermons just skip right over, the text says the fruit looked good. It looked wise. Eve doesn't describe it as gross. She describes it as desirable. But here's the kicker. She had access to every other tree in the entire place. Every. Singles. They. But the moment the serpent points at the one tree with a fence around it, the vibe shifts. Something tightens in her chest. This thing that wasn't a problem 5 minutes ago suddenly becomes the only thing she can think about. And Adam? He's right there. Just standing beside her, watching. And he doesn't say a word. They eat. And the world that was warm suddenly goes freezing cold. The fruit hits the teeth, the eyes open, and nothing is ever the same again. But what was actually happening under the hood? Because this isn't just a snack time mistake. What Eve hit in that moment, that sudden, weirdly irrational obsession with the one thing she wasn't supposed to have, actually has a name in modern psychology. It's called reactance theory. On the screen, you could see a simplified framework of this theory. This psychologist, Jack Brem, mapped it out in 1966, and the principle is almost brutally simple. When we feel like our freedom is being threatened or taken away, we don't just feel neutral about it. We feel this massive surge of desire for exactly what we're told we can't have. The restriction itself becomes the best advertisement for the product. In plain English, being told not that one makes that one the only thing that matters. I've read a lot of these studies, and none of them hit me quite like this story does, because Genesis was describing the human wiring thousands of years before Brem ran a single experiment. The serpent didn't tempt Eve with something scary or alien. He just reframed what she already saw. He nudged her focus away from the ocean of abundance and pointed it at the one tiny restriction, and her whole nervous system just lit up. This is the pattern that runs through every modern life. The diet that fails the second you label bread forbidden. The relationship you can't stop chasing the second they pull back. Reactance isn't ancient history. It's the invisible engine behind half the worst decisions we make. On the surface, Adam and Eve just look like they made a dumb move. That's the surface wound. Impulsivity, curiosity, whatever you want to call it. But if you dig deeper, psychology tells us something much more complex was going on. That tree didn't just represent knowledge. It represented autonomy. The power to define good and evil for themselves, to be, as the serpent put it, like God. The restriction wasn't just poking at their obedience. It was poking at their identity. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan spent decades building self-determination theory around this exact wound. The idea that autonomy isn't just a preference for us. It's a core psychological need. It's as fundamental as food or sleep. So the real wound here wasn't greed. It was the unbearable tension of needing to be the author of your own story, even inside a garden where someone else was writing all the rules. And that tension, it didn't stay in Eden. It moved in with us. You know that feeling when a relationship is actually healthy? Like genuinely good, not just Instagram good, and something inside you starts quietly picking at the threads. Not because anything is actually wrong, but because a part of you doesn't entirely trust that piece. So you test it. You push it. Maybe you start a fight that didn't need to happen. Maybe you go cold for a reason you can't even explain to yourself. Or maybe you know what it's like to be 6 months clean, or 2 years out of the chaos, and you feel the pull of the exact thing you left. Not because life is hard, but because life is stable. And stability is somehow the most disorienting condition the human body has ever tried to live in. Abundance is way harder to hold than we think. We aren't really wired for pure provision. We're wired for the hunt, for problem solving, for the chase, for the thing that's just out of reach. And when everything is within reach, the brain starts looking for the edge. It looks for the no. We don't talk about this enough. How the most self-destructive choices we make often happen right in the middle of something good. People blow up marriages when they're comfortable, not just when they're miserable. Relapses spike during the quiet weeks, not always the hard ones. Adam and Eve weren't desperate. They were provided for. And that, strangely, painfully, is exactly what made the tree more powerful, not less. Sound familiar? Here's where I want to pause and say something that might make some people a little uncomfortable, and I mean this with a lot of respect for the text. Most readings of this story frame the tree as a simple test of obedience. God gave a rule, they broke it, and the consequences followed. Simple moral architecture, right? But I've sat with this passage for a long time, actually a long time, and I'm not sure that's entirely right anymore. Here's the tension I can't resolve. If God built us with the neurological architecture for autonomy, that deep, aching need to be self-determining, then placing a restriction in the middle of a perfect garden feels a lot like a setup. Not in a mean way, but in the way a parent who builds a curious child knows exactly what a locked door does to that kid. Was the tree the point, or was the choice the point? There are theologians who argue that God didn't want robots in the garden. He wanted agents. And agency requires the real possibility of saying no. But here's what keeps me up at night. If the human need for autonomy is hardwired, and the research says it is, then who did the wiring? And what does it mean that the very drive that broke the garden is the same drive that makes human love and creativity possible? Was this a punishment for being human, or was it just the cost of being free? I'm going to stop here for a second because I genuinely want to hear your take. Have you ever been in a version of that moment where you had something real, something good, and some part of you reached for the one thing that could break it? Not because you were unhappy, just because you couldn't leave it alone? Drop that in the comments. I read every single one, and I think you'll find you're in a much better company than you expected. Let's get back to the text. After the garden, after the shame and the fig leaves and the realization that they're naked, what's left isn't just destruction, it's displacement. And being displaced isn't the same thing as being destroyed. Viktor Frankl, writing from inside the absolute horror of Auschwitz, concluded that our main drive isn't happiness. It's meaning. It's the ability to take any disaster and build a framework that lets you keep moving forward. What Adam and Eve faced after the garden was, at its core, a meaning-making crisis. They were handed scarcity after abundance, labor after provision. And yet, they didn't just disappear. They built. They named things. They had kids. They created. I'm not going to tell you it's a clean victory. The text doesn't say that. The work is still hard, and the cost of that one decision follows us through the rest of history. That's a big deal. But there is something quietly incredible in the fact that they kept moving. In the language of post-traumatic growth, the capacity to find meaning after a rupture doesn't mean the wound didn't happen. It just means the wound didn't have the final word. The garden closed, but the story continued. Here's something I find truly strange. And I mean strange in that way where something is both weird and deeply true at the same time. The exact same curiosity that broke Eden is the engine of everything we call civilization. That restless, boundary-testing, why not that one quality of mind, the thing that reached for the fruit, is the same thing that built the printing press. It's what put a person on the moon. It's what produces every piece of art that actually matters, every medical discovery that saves a life, and every question a philosopher asks in the dark. The drive that couldn't leave the tree alone? That's you. In your best moments and your worst ones. I think we've been taught to read this story primarily as a tragedy about what was lost. And yeah, the ease was lost. The world that met you before you even knew you needed it was gone. But what if the curiosity itself was never the mistake? What if the mistake was the moment, but the curiosity was the gift? What if the thing that makes us fall is the exact same thing that makes us build? That's not a comfortable reading, but I've sat with this long enough to believe that both things are true at once, and that the tension between them is where the most honest parts of human life actually live. So here's the question I want to leave you with today. And it's not a theological one, it's personal. When have you been in the garden? When did you have more than enough, and you still reached for the thing with the fence around it? When did the abundance stop feeling like abundance, and the start restriction feeling like the only thing that mattered? What did it cost you? And, if you're being honest, what did you learn out there in the scarcity that you could never have learned in the perfection? Put that in the comments. Seriously. I think this story is running inside every human being who has ever blown up something good. If this one hit close to home, hit subscribe. Every video in this series is going to go somewhere the easy readings don't. We're going to sit with the discomfort. We're going to follow the psychology where it actually leads. Since this is the very first video, the next one is already on the way. And if this question caught you, the next one will too. We're just getting started. Please like, share, and subscribe.